Hello guys, and welcome to the next episode of the Python Career Development Series. Today we are on episode 7 and shall be following on from the last video on Flask and databases, furthering our knowledge by delving into learning fundamental HTML elements. Next we will be going into the style sheets in CSS that I'll be using to style our web pages, and finally I'll be teaching some basic JavaScript, showing you guys implementing everything into our Flask to enhance interactivity. To begin with HTML, we use HTML as the base for web development. It works by giving us readable elements and tags to give us a very basic structure of a web page. Let's get into the HTML and cover some basic elements and tags. To begin, we use HTML locked between greater and smaller than symbols. This is just to start the HTML code. Generally, the next element we use is head. Inside the head elements, we place information for the whole page in, such as the title, denoted by title. Inside of this element, it will determine what the name of the page is, as shown on the top of the tab. Other elements that go into the head include the style sheet from CSS. Also, we can put in what is called metadata information, which includes our character set, the description of the page, and the author as well. The next mainly used element is the body element. This is used to denote the main section of the web page. Inside of this is where you will find all the visible content. Let's get into this visible content. To begin is the headers. There are 6 different header elements, starting at H1, which is the boldest and the largest, and then going down to H6, which is the smallest. Generally, we use the headers in a hierarchy. For my example, I have the main use of this page, which is things about me. Then one thing is I have a YouTube channel, which I then use H4 for some sub information on this point, which is I create YouTube videos to teach coding to everyone. Then linking the channel, but how do I link the channel? This is using the A element. Inside of this element, we put the website link using a hypertext reference, or href. Then in between the A elements, we place the text for the hyperlink link. This is going to be Sam Whitby coding. Now, what do we do if we want an image in our HTML document? We use img and place the source of the image in, using src equals and then the source of the image. Next up is the paragraph element, which we use to write, as in the name, paragraphs by placing the text in between the elements. This is where we can add some tags in by placing this outside of text. Some examples are italic, denoted with an I. Then we could use U to underline, or B to bold the text, as well as many more. If we wanted to make a list, then we use either UL for an unordered list of bullet points and OL for an ordered numbered list. Naming each list item is easy as using LI. My list of other things about me include I'm a maths student, male, have a programming hobby, and I'm English. This is now a very basic HTML structure, and therefore when I run it you can see everything we have done shown on this web page. Now we have done this, let's show something that is more relevant to the last video and the remainder of this video. We will be using the form element. The point of the form element is so we can communicate with back-end code and submit data. Now let's get into some form elements. Like the last video, we used input to create a text box, a password box, and a button. We can give these input values by using value equals, so this will be the text that is already in the text box or the text that is the button displays. We can also give an ID so that we can grab and use the value of the text box in back-end and front-end development. Other elements include select, and then that will give you a drop-down list of options. On buttons, we can also use onClick in a button to also give a JavaScript code. Let's make this button return "Thanks for clicking me." We will go through this JavaScript in a little bit. Now when I run the HTML, you will see a text box with value, write text here, a button that says click me, which when it is pressed it will display our message. This is all the HTML you will need to know for the rest of this video. Now we will be moving into style sheets using CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Let us start by creating a CSS file. You can place the file in any folder you would like. Now to link the file to the HTML. Inside of the head tags we place inside of greater and smaller than symbols, link href and then the location of the CSS file. Following on from there, we use rel equals style sheets to tell the HTML that we are loading in a style sheet. Now to write the CSS file. How this works is we place either an element, an ID, or if we want to create a class, a dot. If you would like to create a class for a more specific element, you do the element dot and the name of the class. If you do not place anything before the dot, then the class will work for any element. Using a hashtag, we can put in an ID. This is so we can have specific styles for an ID. So if I had a button with an ID, my button, then I can style it by doing hashtag my button. So now to add the styles. So after you've declared what you are styling, we use curly brackets. Inside we place our styles. There are absolutely loads of styles to use, so I have attached a PDF with AI generated tables that give the most common styles used. So for my example for paragraphs, I want to set the text colour to blue with colour : blue and the font size to 40 pixels as shown. Now on our HTML, any paragraphs will be blue with a font size of 40. Now I'm going to add some more in quickly. We've now got an orange header 1 and 6, a pink header 3 and a green header 2 with 10% spacing added to the inside of the element. Now this is what our HTML looks like. It is very chaotic. So let's get into classes. So to make a class for a list park called large pink brush, if the list has this class, then the colour is pink with font size of 80 and we set the font to brush script MT. Now going back to our original HTML, we use the class by going down into one of our list items and adding inside of the tags class equals large pink brush. This will give this list item the styles we have just written out, as we can see. Next, I will use the ID my button for any element with the ID my button. It will now have a background colour blue, so let's assign the ID my button to this button in our HTML, and now as you can see the button is blue. Now we can start getting very specific. This is using pseudo class. Depending on the state of an element, we can give it specific styles. The most easiest way to explain this is just to show you. So we want our text to change colour if our mouse hovers over it. We use pseudo classes, a colon, hover, then make it green. Now when we run the program, when I hover my mouse over the link, it turns green. Some more examples would be a colon active, which changes the style it is clicked, or focus is when you select an input field such as text box, and many more. On a very similar wavelength, we have pseudo elements, denoted with a double colon instead of a single colon. This can be used to style parts of an element, such as the first letter, first line, a bullet point, and etc. Or it can be used in content, such as place content before or after an element. For my example, let's make the first letter of a paragraph P 20 pixels and orange. As you can see, I've done that here, and the HTML now on our paragraph element, the first letter is now 20 pixels and orange. Maybe want to change our marker to an arrow for our bullet points. So for a list, we use double colon marker, and then the content of the mark is an arrow. As you can now see in our HTML, this has worked. After all of these changes, we can see our very messed up and not very aesthetically pleasing HTML. but I am now going to introduce CSS Bootstrap. CSS Bootstrap is a popular style sheet that is used to make responsive and device-friendly websites. We can use the classes that are in this style sheet to make a website that looks far superior. So in order to add this style sheet in, we need to place the href with the link for Bootstrap, which I will place in the description so you don't have to find it or copy out this massive link that I've just put in. Now I'm going to simply add some Bootstrap classes into our HTML. I will add into the body class container MT5, which will add a 48 pixel margin on the top and centers of all content inside the body to a fixed width layout. Then I'm going through all our elements and adding in some Bootstrap classes to enhance the looks of all of our elements. Now when I run it, I get this web page, which is far more pleasing to look at compared to what it was before. Now let's leave all this HTML behind for a moment and let that all sink in, because that was a lot of information. We're going to go back to basics. Just remember the first episode of the series when we were going through the basics of Python. Now relax your brain, we're going to do the same but with JavaScript. But once you know one programming language, it makes it so much easier to learn another. We're going to be using JavaScript later on to enhance the interactivity and give behaviours and dynamics to our Flask web pages. First of all, we're going to create a quick HTML document that will run our JavaScript. Very simply, in between HTML tags, I will add in the JavaScript by using script src equals and then the directory to my JavaScript file. Now into the JS file. To print to the web page, we use document.writeLine ln, and then in brackets the message we want. In this case, hello followed by a semicolon. Now our web page will be very simply display hello. Lovely and simple. Next, create a variable. In JavaScript, we need to declare the variable first, which is a very good practice as it's the same for most languages. So var, then the variable name, and then equals, and then the content of the variable, which is Sam, semicolon. Then we can print out the name by concatenating it onto the string my name is. Here is a note here. There is a semicolon at the end of every instruction in JavaScript. This is something that is very common in languages. So therefore, it is very good practice to place a semicolon at the end of every line. However, in JavaScript there is automatic semicolon insertion, which means if you forget to put a semicolon in JavaScript, it will automatically figure it out and place one in for you. This may cause unnecessary bugs though, so try your best to keep placing semicolons at the end of instructions. So now this is our web page. My name is Sam. Now on to making functions in JavaScript. Pretty much the same thing here. You'll recognise it from Python. We do function and function name, animal and brackets with the variables it receives, just like in Python, but then followed by a set of curly brackets instead of a colon. Now we place what this function does inside of the curly brackets. We can call this function the same as Python as follows. This web page now says Poppy is a dog that barks. Next up is an array. We create this with the array name, names array, equals new array, and then what the array is. So for my example, it is an array of names, Sophie, Sam, Dan, Hannah. Now we have a list where you can use this list to show you if, else if and else statements. To create this, we use if and then place the condition in brackets. For this, my condition is if names array index 2 is Sophie, then we shall do what is in the curly brackets. If the condition is false, we can make it go to an else if statement, which is the same. This condition is if Sophie is in the names array, then complete what is inside the next set of curly brackets. And then finally else, which acts as expected if all of our previous conditions do not hold. While loops are as expected, while, then brackets, the condition, then whilst the condition is being met, the curly brackets will keep repeating. For us, the variable I will go up by 1 until I is not less than 30, and therefore we'll print O 30 times. Finally, the things we have seen in Python, for loops, as you would expect layout. However, a key thing here is names will not assign each value in names array. It will go through the indexes instead. The equivalent in Python would be the names array in range length of names array. Then we will repeat inside the curly brackets until we reach the end of names array. Perfect. Now that is the basics we know from Python. Now let's actually get into why we want to use JavaScript here. Let's go through some JavaScript exclusive functions we can use for our web page. So let's start off with some pop-up messages. There are 3 types. Prompt will ask you a question whilst giving a text box. So start with creating a variable and setting it to prompt. In brackets, then write your question, which for mine is, what is your name? What this will do is once the text box has been submitted, it sets my variable name to the content of the text box. We've got alert, which will place whatever we place down in brackets as shown. Finally, confirm. This will pop up with a message that you can either press OK or cancel. If we set this function to a variable, if you place OK, it will set the variable to true. If cancel, then false. All of these functions are very useful when it comes to the user receiving your message quickly, as it works as a pop-up. One more function that we can use is set timeout. Using this, we can delay a certain command from being outputted. So in my example, we want to alert the user with the alert, press OK. Once 5,000 milliseconds have passed, or 5 seconds. So when the website comes up, 5 seconds later, it will pop up with my alert. Now onto a few more functions, but these ones are a little bit more complex and work on receiving data from HTML documents. The first one is document.getElementById. We can store a HTML element of choice in a constant variable. So to write this, we write constant, then the variable name, text box, and set it equal to document.getElementById. Now in the brackets, we're going to want to place the ID of the element. So let's jump back here to our very basic HTML. I have added a text box with the ID text box, which is now accessible in our JavaScript. So back to the JavaScript, we can now start doing stuff to this element from JavaScript instead of having to edit it from the HTML side. So one example is textbox.style.backgroundColor equals orange. This will use the element's variable and then set the background color of what that element is to orange. So now if we show the HTML document, the text box is orange. But we can also do the value of the text box, so let's set it to hello world. The next function we can look at is the add event listener. JavaScript will catch any event that is happening, whether that being a button press, an input in a text box, or even just scrolling the page. These are called event listeners. We can use add event listener to attach a function to it. So here is my example of me using it. We will start with a button making a variable storing the HTML element for it. Now I will use button.addEventListener. In the brackets I will place the event listener, which is click, so it will activate the function when the button is pressed. Then followed by function, and in curly brackets the algorithm the button press will do. So for this program our text box will turn blue. So when we run it, as you can see, pressing the text box, it turns the text box blue. How about if we want to add an element into our HTML whilst we have a web page up? In JavaScript, we can add an element to the HTML using variable equals document.createElement. then in brackets put the element. So for my example, I am adding a new paragraph, but before we can use it, we need to give it some content and maybe some styles just using the same method from earlier. So new paragraph dot value equals you press the button. I'm using this text since I'm going to throw this code inside the event listener that the button was pressed. Now to add this new element onto the HTML document, we use document.body, since we want it in the body, append child, then in brackets place our variable. So when we run it for our program, every time the button is pressed, we add the new paragraph, and we are so close to the end now, just one simple line, redirecting. So take us to a different website. We can use window.location.href and then just write the URL. So now I can get redirected to YouTube as shown. Now for the most important function that we're going to use a lot, fetch. It is used to handle HTTP requests. We can use these to handle responses at the same time. So it has a certain structure. So first we call fetch, then in brackets we place the URL we will be sending the request for data to. We can then optionally place a method type in the parameters, so we use method colon. And for our example we will put post, but you can use post, get, put and more, and the default is get if you don't put anything. If you use put or post, we must publish the body using JSON.stringify to convert our JavaScript object to a JSON. The JavaScript will be a key value pairs like a dictionary. The 3 lines that are must-have things in the function, we will go through them one by one. Dot then, response arrow, response.json will receive the response from the request and convert it to JSON so we can access it. Dot then, data arrow, which is where we will place what we want to do with the data. For this example, we will just print the data. Then finally, dot catch. This will catch any errors caused and can show the error to you if you want. Now, how about we use all of this? Here is my web page. We can start on the login page. When I type into the text boxes a random username and password, then once I try and log in, it will come up with invalid credentials. The HTML page was modified without having to reload the page. That was using the JavaScript. You can also see that we have used Bootstrap to make the visuals much better as well. When I type in a username and password that we do have in a database, once I submit it, it comes up saying login successful in green. Great. Now we have a link to go to the sign up page. We click on it and get sent to the page. We have a username, password and a confirm password text box. If we try and add a username that is already in the database, it will tell us that the username already exists. If I have a different username but the 2 passwords don't match, then it will let us know of this as well. Finally though, if the passwords match and it's a different username, then it will say that we have signed up successfully, and then a key point here, it will a couple seconds later automatically redirect us back to the login page to now log in with these new credentials. Let us take a look at the code. We start in the header tag. In this is where we place the title of our web page, sign up page, and then link our Bootstrap URL and our JavaScript script. Now we have a very basic HTML form, but don't let the classes confuse you. All the classes are doing is changing the visuals of each element. Notice the name of the functions that are being called by the button when it is clicked. We will be using these in the script. We also have a checkbox that will determine if we are showing the password or not. The main thing we want to focus on are our IDs in the text boxes. We have ID username, password and conf password. We will be using these in JavaScript in a little bit. Notice nearing the bottom of the form we have a paragraph tag with no value and just the ID message. This is for the message that pops up after pressing button. So we will be messing around with this in the script as well. Finally is simply the link that goes to the login URL. with the message, already got an account, log in. That is the sign up page. Now this is what the login page looks like, however you should be able to figure this one out. On to the JavaScript. To start is a function that will be called when the button is clicked. This function is for the button on the login page, which we will see we called in HTML. We start by getting the username and password from setting the variables to the value of the element that we grab from the ID. Document.getElement by ID, username / password .value. Lovely. So we have our username and password. Now let's use these. We use fetch to send a request to the HTTP server, with the method being post, and we're going to use the data. Since we are posting, we need to be using body json.strongify, and then the data that we're going to be using our username and password. We then use our response and catch as shown earlier. Here we want to use the data though, so we do dot then data arrow, and now here in our algorithm. In this algorithm we want to start by setting a HTML element, which is the one we are using for the pop-up message earlier. Now we are going to be using data.status. This will be the data from the HTTP or the Flask program. Since we haven't gone through the Flask program as of yet, I will write this, but we will come back to it later. So if the status we receive from the Flask is success, then we would like to set the color of our message to green. If the status is not success, then we want to set the message color to red. After this, we will set the value of the message to data.message that we receive from the Flask, which once again, I will come back to you. I won't leave you in the dark here. Right, okay, so that was a lot of information, so feel free to pause here and make sure you completely understand what is going on here. Luckily for everyone, the next function for the sign up is pretty much the exact same. The only differences are, as we have a confirm password box, we also have a variable conf password, this time which you can see the value getting grabbed and the variable being used in our stringify here. Then the only other difference is that we want to redirect the user back to the login page. So once they have successfully signed up, we can see here as set timeout being used as shown before, with it redirecting us 2000 milliseconds or 2 seconds later. So to relax your brain a little, we are just going to focus on our little checkbox that shows and hides the password. The two functions here are just for each web page. Since on the sign up page I've made it so it also shows the confirms password value, not just the password. So just by looking at the login page, the sign up page is pretty self-explanatory. So we have the function that is called when the checkbox is interacted with. We grab the HTML element for the text box with the password in it. We then check if the type of input is password. If it is, then we want to swap this type to text. If not, then it will change to password. Basically, we are just switching the type because the password type shows asterisks as the text shows the actual letters. Well done. You have just gone through your potentially first script for a Flask web page. Once again, just make sure you completely understand everything we have already gone through, because unfortunately with these Flask applications we have 3 different programs working together, so we need to see where they link. I imagine by now you're absolutely sick of seeing JavaScript, so let's just go back to Python to conclude this video. I know this is a long video, so I really appreciate you sticking around. So first of all, we will skim over the stuff that we did last video. So we have our database and configured it. We have created the details of the database DB model and the tables. In our inputs, we have our Flask render template and our SQL alchemy. However, to link this all up with the JavaScript, we will also need to be importing request and JSONify, which we will use in a second. Let's begin at the login page. we create the function and the root with the methods get and post. If the method is not post, then we are running our HTML template login.html. Now, if we are in our post method, we do as following. We start with the data equals request.json. This will be requesting from the body block in the JavaScript, which in this case is the json.stringify, which have the property and value of username and password. So we now collect this data from the JSON with the following. Username equals data.get, then the property name username, and for password the same. Now from last video we get all our users in our database from details.query.all. Then we go through each user with for user in users. Then for each user we're going to check if the username and password we receive from each person match. Now remember from earlier I said I won't leave you in the dark. Well, here we are. If they do match, then we're going to return this as follows. JSONify message, as in our data.message we used earlier, has the value login successful. So that means that in our Java, the message's text content will be set to login successful. Then status, just like earlier, in data.status we set to success. So now we can see how data.status can equal success because we can just send the data through the Flask. So we have just changed the HTML document in real time. Similarly, if no user has the username and password, we know that the invalid credentials have been inputted, so we use the JSONify again. But this time the message is invalid credentials and the data status is set to error, so in Java it will run the else instead. So close to the end now. For the sign up page there is no new knowledge, we are just using logic which we just got from the login page. We grab the values of username, password and confirm password from the data just like before. Let's start off with the password and confirm password. If the inputs do not match, then we have an error with the inputs, so we want to return JSONify with the message and the passwords do not match, and therefore the status of the data is an error. Now from the last video, adding a new user, so to start we have the IDs list and we will have all the IDs of all the users. We will just be using this list to determine what is the first ID that isn't in use. So we test all the users again. If we find that the username already exists, then we will return this username already exists and the status is an error. If we get through this for loop, we know we have a unique username and passwords that match. So in our eyes, it is a success in this case. So, just like last video, we add this username and password and the new ID of this user to our database. Then we will turn the message that the sign up was successful and therefore the status of success, turning the text green, displaying it, and then 2 seconds later sending us back to the login page to log in with our new credentials. Perfect, we are done. Nothing more today. Thank you so much for making it. We are now going to do a quick test to test your knowledge. What are the uses of style sheets? What does the following code do? How do you add a script in HTML? How can you call a JavaScript function from a button in HTML? What does text.type equals text do in JavaScript, where text is an HTML element? And what does this code mean for the values of data.status and data.message in JavaScript? Perfect. The answers to these are in the comments, so make sure to go down and comment how you did. All the code from today will be up on GitHub, which will be linked in the description. Next video, we will be focusing primarily on interactions with a database using SQL and Object Relational Mapping, or ORM. Thank you again for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, it would be amazing if you can like this video and subscribe to the channel. Please comment down below any suggestions moving forward, and I hope to see you again soon.